everyone. So for November, I'm doing this thing where I am filling requests. It was originally going to be something else, but this is my thank you subscribers November. And so we're going to have two videos every week. This is our second one. Someone requested another Jubilee video reaction. So I chose the one Is Being Fat a Choice Middle Ground from Jubilee. So let's just go ahead and start watching.
I'm sorry. There's a very
difference.
big difference between the people who are telling people go out and get fat versus a Lizzo who's saying accept me the way I am.
She's not just saying accept me the way I am. She's dressing extremely scantily clad and then saying if you don't think that it's normal for a morbidly obese person to be wearing a G-string in the middle of public, then you're the problem.
Being fat or skinny is a choice. Agreeers?
Of course, not every factor is purely choice. I don't think that every factor is, but I do think a majority of it is. And in most cases, for most people, being skinny or being fat is about willpower. It's about the environment you grow up in, sure, but who you choose to associate with, what sort of things you choose to listen to, who you choose to kind of have as your friends around you and support you. All of those things are choices that you can make that will lead you closer towards being one or the other.
I know what I do.
I actually agree with him wholeheartedly. I liked his phrasing of that. Like there are some exceptions to this, but in general, based on who you surround yourself with and the choices that you make around food, will kind of influence you towards one or the other. I would agree with that.
With my body, I know what I put into it day in and day out. I choose not to eat some days. I choose, how I want to look. And I don't fault anyone for how they want to look or how they want to be, but I think it's a choice at the end of the day. I'm very, always wish-washy on how I want to be presented and if I want to gain weight or not. But the only person that's going to gain the weight at the end of the day is me and me myself.
For me, it's calories in, calories out. Go to the gym, you'll get buff. Don't go to the gym, you won't get buff. I understand that there's genetics that could cause you to want to eat more, but even with the genetics that cause you to want to eat more, the same solution is calories in, calories out.
I think the whole choice is, always determined on who they are, and it's not going to just be a thing done overnight.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of, I think it's like breaking the barrier and breaking a lot of things, not only your body, but also breaking your mental state.
Sure.
And again, that depends on who you are and what you want to go through.
Disagreeers?
I felt like as a toddler, I always viewed myself as big. I grew up in a very poor home, so where my mom couldn't provide the meals that she could healthily. So when we would get free meals, even then it would be canned food, and it would be very much food that's not as edible. It was food for us, yes, but then I felt like once it reached a point where I was old enough to try to make my own choices, I made all of the wrong choices. I wasn't eating, and I was only eating grapes and lettuce, and that was mainly because I was in a sport, and that sport just worked me out so hard. And it was to the point where I just was scared to eat. I didn't like it. I would only drink water.
When you were eating grapes and lettuce, were you thin?
I was the thinnest I could be.
Were you still big though?
I was still big, but that was the skinniest I've ever been. And that's coming from somebody who was only eating somewhat salads that are just fruit and lettuce and water and maybe ice right before a practice.
Do you think that right now you would not be capable of becoming a thin woman if
I
you wanted to?
possibly would.
When it comes to eating food, what you could get for free and stuff, I don't, and I think you guys have heard me before. I don't think you can place responsibility on children, for the weight that they are. That falls on the parents. And with the barrier of, not having enough food to really choose what you can eat, then there is something there, and especially as a child, she had no say. Do I think that she ate nothing but lettuce, grapes, and drank water and was still big? No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't. I don't believe that. I think that might be how you felt like you were eating. Um, but I don't think that that's how things actually were. If I think if you were eating that way, you probably would not have, and you were like working out. I feel like you would have had some issues with passing out, wouldn't you? Like that's like not enough calories to even really function. So there's no way that you can be eating that little and doing a sport and not be really thin and not be or dropping weight like crazy. It's not something I would recommend, and it's not something that I would advocate for in the slightest. I'm just saying I don't think that that's how that happened. That might have been how you felt it happen, but that I think if someone were to log everything that you ate during that time, that you probably ate more than you realized.
Be capable of becoming a thin woman, but since I was young, I was supposed to get blood tested probably when I was very, very young, and I never did. And they had mentioned that it could have been because of my weight and how that connects with my thyroid. I never made the connection, and I never had like that like leaning parent to be like, go and get checked out, go and do this, like your weight is probably not your fault. It was always like your weight is your fault, so that's your issue.
I mean, I also struggle with, thyroid and my own blood issues. I'm not quite sure, but I do see an endocrinologist and I go see a doctor. It's a choice to do the requisite steps. It's a choice to go grocery shopping instead of going to fast food when it's easy. It's a choice when you're grocery shopping to go to the outer aisles and like not go into the bread section and not go into the junk food section. These are all choices.
As a disabled woman, I can't do a lot of the things that people say, calories in, calories out, oh, you got to go work out and exert it. A lot of the things that are typical, oh, this is how you lose weight, put me in the hospital. I have to navigate weight differently. I have to look at it differently. My weight is the way it is because of medication, because doctors put me in this position. And I had to learn, okay, am I going to be so hateful of my own body that I am going to backlash and put myself through extreme gym nights, through keeping myself from eating things that I should be able to eat. You should be able to have a balance. You should be able to go into the junk food aisle like other skinny people do and still not have to worry about gaining 20 pounds.
But I don't think skinny people go into this junk food aisle.
They
I think
certainly
Yes,
do.
they do.
We eat a lot of junk food.
Yeah.
I mean,
a lot of junk
Yeah.
food.
I mean, my DoorDash would tell you otherwise. Like,
There's a thing called set points. There's a ton of research on it.
Okay, before we get into the set point thing, for her, I'm not sure what it is. The only thing I will say is that it's like you say calories in, calories out, but I can't. The thing is, though, is that the concept still stays. I'm not saying that maybe your situation is really unique and that you can't work out. Okay, and then maybe too much of a calorie restriction isn't good for your body, doesn't work with the medication, doesn't, I don't know. I don't know that seems like it would be something to talk with your doctor about on how to include weight management in your care plan. But that doesn't negate the general principles around calories in, calories out, The concept still stands. You may need to approach it from a slightly different position, but the concept still stands. And yeah, I'm gonna disagree with this woman here. Plenty of skinny people eat junk food. There's plenty of skinny people that eat like absolute garbage too. The thing is that they don't eat enough of it to gain weight. They may just not eat very much, and what they do eat is shit. That's a possibility too.
That your body likes to be at specific weights. It likes to be in a specific way. So if you are fighting yourself to lose weight by
So, but set points can be changed. That's the thing. Set points can be changed. Does your body like to be within a certain weight range? Yes and no. There can be from what I've read, and I unfortunately don't have any citations off the top of my head for this, so this you're just gonna have to, well, say based on the different things that I've seen and stuff, this is just my opinion. So feel free to come back with something completely different in the comments. This is so totally open here. But there is a level of your body likes to be at this within this weight range, and if you drop below that too quickly, it can trigger like mass, like massive hunger and a drive to eat more and an obsession with food. But your set point can change. And so the general rule that I've heard is you lose 10% of your weight, you maintain it for a little while, and then you lose at most another 10%, and then you maintain it for a little while, and that's how you reset that set point over and over until you're at a weight level that you prefer, that is better for you. It's not, you're not stuck there for your entire life. That seems more like a cop out to me.
Not eating, over exercising, and you are damn near killing yourself to be at a specific weight, your body's unhappy.
It's important to note
The thing is, though, is that you're probably trying to go too hard, too fast, too quick. And that's the issue.
that a choice can be harder for people to make due to conditions in their life.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's still a choice. I could say that I had food addiction. I looked to food when I was stressed and this and that and this. And so it's harder for me to choose it than for someone who has like the perfect lifestyle, someone who has parents who are giving them this and that and this. But I definitely still acknowledge that it was my choice. At the end of the day, when I go there and I look and I see, should I order a second hamburger? I'm the one choosing whether or not I order that second hamburger. I'm the one making that choice.
I would rather be skinny than fat. Can the agreeers please step forward?
I like this guy. I feel like he's pretty honest and straightforward. She comes across a bit unlikable, but I feel like she's pretty honest herself. I don't agree with everything she says, and I think she has a little bit of a black and white view, but I think these two are pretty honest. I think he's pretty honest too. I think that he generally doesn't care much if he's fat or skinny, but he can acknowledge that it's a choice he makes. I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure about him. But anyway, let's hear what they have to say.
I think there's a lot of different struggles when it comes to being a bit bigger. And I have a sister that is she's 400 pounds and she struggles a lot. She has lymphedema and to shower is really, really hard. So I do think for like an overall happy life and like zero struggle, I think I'd rather be skinny.
I think that it is common in society to want to be skinny. I think the average person typically wants to be skinny. I'm actually surprised that I didn't see more people come forward on that question. People treat you better. It is what is considered the standard of beauty. Your life expectancy is longer. You tend to be healthier.
I'm also really tall. I'm 6'6", so I kind of wish I could just pick a single struggle because finding the clothes and things like that when you're bigger both ways can make it really hard. So if I was skinnier, at least that's one less thing I have to worry about. But also, I've got 2 kids and a wife, and I'm taking care of them. And as you pointed out, I definitely think that I'm at less health risks if I'm a skinnier person, if I'm a healthier person in that capacity. And I would much rather be that so that I could be around for my kids longer.
Can the disagreeers please step forward?
I'm speaking as someone who actually was a former smaller person, and I had the most body insecurities when I was small. I was
Okay, so I just need to throw this out there. And I'm not saying that, skinny people can't have insecurities. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that. But she doesn't look that old. So when you're like, when I was skinny, when some of these people say, when I was skinny, I had all these body insecurities, how old were you? How old were you? Because if you were younger than your mid-20s, I would say that your insecurities stemmed more from your age than your weight. That's like teenagers, young 20-somethings probably have the most anxiety around their appearance. And then as you get older, it becomes more about health and you don't really you don't have as many fucks to give about what people think. But body insecurities are very prevalent in teenagers and early 20s because that's where a lot of your focus is. You don't have the responsibilities of adulthood the same way yet. And so scope of concern is much narrower, which means you can focus in on it more and you can be more concerned about it. You can still have body insecurities as an adult. I'm not saying that you don't, but I would say that they are probably more intense when you are younger. So my question is, how old were you when you had your most intense body insecurities when you're talking about that? And were you skinny still within a more adult point of your life and you still had those insecurities? That's kind of my question.
Constantly living in fear of gaining weight and having people tell me, oh, don't gain weight, don't do this, make sure that your weight is the same. And once I finally gained weight, I realized that first off, life wasn't over. I didn't feel any need to not engage in life the previous way that I had, and the attention that I got was different. But even as a smaller person, you get negative attention. And rather than trying to control my body to avoid that negative attention, I would prefer to address the situation as a society, make it more accessible for everybody to where we aren't feeling like I have to be a certain way that's normal in order to be treated like a human being and respected.
If I could counter, because I was a bit bigger when I was younger, and that's when I was the most insecure. I would look in the mirror. I did have family members that were skinny, but then I had a family member that was much bigger. And just the way that I perceived myself, I hated it, and I even became anorexic.
I like that she is kind of putting this in perspective because she says when she was younger, she was bigger, and that's when she had her biggest insecurities. I'm telling you, I think that it's more connected to age than it is to weight. Don't get me wrong, you can still have insecurities. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying the intensity of it and when you feel the most strongly about it is probably more connected to age than it is to any particular appearance level.
To like not be big.
I don't think skinny always equates to being healthy.
Exactly.
I am fairly skinny. I'm 6'5". I'm 140 pounds last time I checked, and I'm severely underweight. And I know about this on a day-to-day basis. That being said, I don't know where I'd want to lean at an appropriate weight level, but I think it's important to understand for some skinny people, we're not living a great life by any means. And sometimes I feel like that's always kind of lost in translation.
I think he has a valid point. Like, yeah, you can be skinny and not be healthy. I'm not denying that. The question is, would you rather be skinny than fat? And it's one of those things where it's like we're not saying that you can't have issues when you're skinny, but generally the issues when you're skinny are less than when you're fat. So that's kind of my perspective on that.
They see someone who's really skinny.
I guess it depends on what you mean when you think of the term skinny. Are you thinking of just like an average weight person, or are you thinking of how you are now?
I'm the average weight for like women in America.
Okay, I don't think that she's an average weight. I know that fat acceptance people like to tout, the average size is a size 16. I don't think she's a size 16. I would say if we were going to go average weight, this woman's a bit closer. She's a bit smaller than her, and she's a bit closer to like if we were going to go average. But average American size is not necessarily healthy. We're talking about a healthy weight. When we say average, we're talking about the average healthy weight, like BMI, what's considered like the average healthy weight. And in this way, it's probably not used as precisely as it could be, but we're talking about the healthy weight, not necessarily the average weight, because Americans are notoriously overweight.
If we're talking about an average, like I'm going to be the closest. If your biggest priority is to be at a smaller body, you need to.
I'm sorry, but no, Madeline, you're not. I don't think you're the closest. No, you're not. You're not the closest to average weight. I think she's the biggest one here. Maybe he's a bit bigger. I'm not sure. Uh, she's not the average.
Reassess your priorities.
Yeah, not focus on health.
Yeah.
And the immediate tie between skinniness and health, like you emphasized, there is such a gap between the research, because the research has a huge fat phobic bias in it, and there has been research that shows that they aren't, even especially during, let's say, COVID and the correlation between obesity. They rushed through those studies so fast because in society's mind, oh, of course a fat person is going to equal someone who's going to get sick faster, is going to get sick easier. It was an easy jump. So they didn't do all of the testing that they were supposed to do.
Please, this is such a generalization. What study are you referring to? Genuinely, what study are you referring to? Because my understanding was that correlation with you're more susceptible and have worse outcomes with COVID if you are overweight, if you are obese, was based on statistics. Like it wasn't an actual study, it was a statistical observation. That was my understanding of it. Was when if you took all of the people at the time that had COVID that were hospitalized and that had worse outcomes, a substantial portion of them were obese. A statistically substantial portion of them were obese, and that led to the connection. It wasn't a rigorous study, it was an observation. And then that observation was looked at by several hospitals. So and that way it was like an observational study to a degree, but not exactly because it still was not it wasn't a study, it was an observation of data.
Didn't check their bias.
So
They
if
didn't
by
check.
saying the study is biased, you're saying that the study didn't account for the variable that obesity may also take a factor into. It's just that there's so many variables in humanity that these pharmaceutical companies could only account for so many during their trials. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're biased. However, you want to talk about bias in studies, actually recently we've been doing the opposite. So for instance, a lot of our studies have been based on BMI, and so we've been showing that, oh, fat people aren't necessarily extremely unhealthy if we look at people with a certain BMI. However, bodybuilders also have a really high BMI, and so they get counted into that category. And so it wasn't until very recently.
With her too, I kind of wish that she was pointing it out because the thing is that with studies like that, they're not necessarily bringing in bodybuilders. It like we really need to know what we're looking at here. I really wish I had something to read here for this when they're making claims like this. It's just one of those things where it's like, don't get me wrong, I agree that there are more risks when you are obese. Um, but this talk of studies without an even a rough explanation of what the study was specifically looking at, like with the COVID thing. Uh, she was talking about studies, but then this woman was talking about trials, and the other woman was nodding along. It's like, okay, so are we talking about the vaccine trials, or are we talking about the hospitalizations? What are we talking about here? I wish they would at least give some background as to what they're referring to when they're talking about these studies, because studies is such a broad term that I'm having a hard time following along with what exactly are we arguing here, because these can be two very different things. Obesity testing for trials and obesity representation in those that were affected by COVID are two very different things and can have two very different outcomes and have two very different representations. So it's a pet peeve of mine.
That they equated for that mistake, and it shows, oh my goodness, being fat is actually extremely unhealthy, like way more unhealthy than we ever realized.
You can't gauge health by looking at somebody.
Yeah.
Like none of my health issues, all of them precipitated my weight gain.
You can to some extent with some people. I'm sorry, but I think you can look at the people on My 600-Pound Life and know that they're not healthy. Just as you can look at someone smoking a cigarette and then coughing intermittently while they're smoking a cigarette and know that they're unhealthy. It's there's Can you look at every single person and immediately know if they are unhealthy simply by appearance? No. But there are certain circumstances where you can look at someone and kind of tell that they're unhealthy.
But I always get assumed, oh, don't you want to be skinny so that you don't have a cane anymore and you don't feel the way you feel? And it's like, no, because I have lupus and I'm always going to feel like this.
gonna happen
Like I
no
have
matter what.
CRPS. It's going to deteriorate. It's going to continue.
America has an obesity problem.
Can I sit next to you?
Oh, absolutely, you
perfect.
can. I think it's pretty clear. You look at the weight of the average American, you see how obesity has affected not just children. I mean, the fact that we have more younger and younger people who are looking heavier and heavier, and you see that, like, you know, the way that weight affects us as a society, and you compare that to how we were in the past. Now, not that we should always, you know, we shouldn't compare ourselves to the era of the Great Depression when people just couldn't find food, of course, but people are heavier now in an unhealthy way, and people are eating unhealthy. They are eating it through unhealthy access to food. They're eating diets high in seed oils. They're eating high corn syrup. They're doing all this kind of stuff that's not good for them that we didn't used to do, and it's bad. It's not a good thing. It's an epidemic. It needs to be quashed in some capacity.
There's so much access to just anything.
Yeah.
Like, it's so crazy these days. And, you know, I'm so surprised that we're actually supporting a lot of this, you know, and there's always people like, you know, like, it's fine that we have like 3 McDonald's like on the same street. And it's just like, we don't think that this is adding to the problem.
What I think is really sad about that is so many people in America just see the profit in it. I don't want to say I know that these people know the problem, but it's like, how can you not see the problem? They have to see it and just not care. They have to just be like, well, we're gaining profit. Do you see how much this McDonald's is making? Put another one across the street. Like, that's just like how it is.
That's the corporations. It's the medical industry. Having a fat country makes us money.
It doesn't help that our cities aren't walkable either.
Yeah.
America
I gotta be honest, these two kind of confuse me that they agree that America has an obesity problem, but she in particular had mentioned that there's set points and you can't control your weight. So I'm kind of confused as to why she views obesity as a like I'm not I want to be clear, there's no disagreement here. I agree America has an obesity problem, but I'm a little confused by their perspective. Her less so, she was less vocal about when to be skinny or thin, but she also did not sit down when for the obesity is a choice thing. But that can be explained away by her just viewing it as a position of like a systemic issue, I guess, which I guess would equate for them too. But her specifically though, Madeline was talking about how like there were set points and she seemed to buy in that there was a set point that you could not change and that your body wanted to be a certain weight and therefore you could not lose weight. So I'm this her viewing that America has an obesity problem is a little confusing to me because to me that would suggest that it's not just natural, that in fact you can change it. So I'm really confused as to how this fits. I'm hoping she speaks up more.
is a country of non-walkable.
That is why I wavered a little bit because I think we have a problem with how to treat obesity. I think we have a problem with how to make it so that it is not an epidemic. This is a systemic thing that we are in a society and in an environment that breeds this, and we are doing it to ourselves, we are doing it to our children, and our corporations and our industries are doing it to us, and they aren't having to take responsibility.
And they're encouraging it with media. So
And the
like,
mukbangs, I was literally gonna bring that up. The mukbangs and like all those videos that just come up to
it's
trends. For people
not
to do
only
it as
the
well.
mukbangs, but also like Lizzo and other big like media.
I don't
people.
know. I'm sorry.
That's-
There's a
that's a
very
different-
big
yeah.
difference between the people who are telling people go out and get fat versus a
I love
Lizzo
myself
who's saying
fat.
accept me
Yeah.
the way I am.
She's not just saying accept me the way I am. She's dressing extremely scantily clad and then saying if you don't think that it's normal for a morbidly obese person to be wearing a G-string in the middle of public, then you're the problem.
So this is where, like, here's the thing. We've seen she actually has an argument with Lizzo because Lizzo did, at least for a while, kind of bolster the fat acceptance movement and played in a little bit to their rhetoric before she kind of went the other way. So there it was a little bit. This is from last year, which was before I think Lizzo went kind of in the opposite direction. So there was a little bit of an argument to be had here. Uh, to argue though that she is part of the problem because she dresses scantily clad as a morbidly obese woman is something that I just kind of disagree with. Um, that comes down to personal preference. Is it something I would do? No. Is it something I personally would seek out to look at? No. But I don't think that her dressing how she wants and saying if you don't like it, tough shit is an issue for me. That's not like part of the obesity issue for me. Her saying that there was a time when she was doing this where she was like promoting that you're fine just the way you are even if you are morbidly obese, which could be taken multiple ways, and that could I could see how that could contribute because that kind of falls under the every weight is a healthy weight sort of mentality, which is wrong. That I could see some, but her just kind of dressing however the fuck she wants to dress, I don't think is inherently adding to the obesity problem. It's the same reason why I don't typically comment too much on how uh fat acceptance creators dress or how they present themselves or when they're doing their dancing, because if you were literally just kind of living and existing the way you want, that's not the issue. It's when you're professing a form of rhetoric that for the weaker and for the vulnerable could be a very dangerous thought process. That tends to be where I tend to be more of an issue, where I take more of an issue, or when they like advocate for fighting your doctors on their medical expertise because you don't like that they are asking you to address your weight. Like that's the type of thing that I have more of an issue with, not that Lizzo chose to be scantily clad or wear a G-string as a morbidly obese person. That's not my business, and if I don't want to look at it, then I just don't look at it.
And they're trying to normalize society to this obese culture, which is extremely unhealthy. And
What is an obese culture?
a culture which like normalizes
I'm obese
obesity.
and I haven't even heard that.
Well, obesity is already normal, so
Well, I don't think it should be normalized, and it wasn't normal
But
just a couple
what's the
decades
difference
ago.
between a obese person, myself, walking around in a G-string or a bathing suit, as I do almost every day, and a skinny person? Like, is it okay that the skinny person is doing that?
I don't think so, but
I don't think
that's for other reasons.
I get the whole public thing.
to say that when Lizzo does it is the same as a Victoria's Secret angel
Why
is just not
shouldn't
the
it be,
same.
though? Yeah, what's the
'Cause
difference?
What do you mean? Are you telling me they look? You're telling me it doesn't.
I'm not saying they look the same.
Well,
but
I
I'm
mean,
saying
Lizzo
Yeah, see, this is where to me it just seems like this girl in red just I think that she finds obese people grotesque, and that's the issue that she has. And it's like she can't distinguish the difference between the uh, the actual promotion of obesity and obese people simply living their lives. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if the Madeline here wants to go around in a G-string bikini, that's her business. I don't think that she's normalizing anything. I think she's living her life. She can wear whatever the fuck she wants when she wants, as long as she is not being indecent in public. And if she's at her own home, she can wear whatever the fuck she wants. And if she's putting something on a platform that doesn't allow for it, the platform can take it down. But if she's putting it on, say, OnlyFans, that's her choice. If even if she's like ass fully out or whatever, if other platforms don't support it, but there is a platform that does, then she can do that. If she's out in public and the minimum is required to not be considered indecent, whatever the fuck she wears is her goddamn business. I really disagree with this one here personally.
That's the implication. So if I walk down the street, I'm a runway model. I'm a print and runway model. I have walked down a runway in a thong. So me doing that is shameful, but a skinny model is okay.
I didn't. I don't know if I use the phrase shameful,
Problematic.
but I don't think that we as a society should be modeling obesity.
But I'm not modeling obesity. I'm modeling the lingerie that obese people need to be able to have availability to buy.
So they've always had the ability to buy
we have not.
lingerie.
If you go to Torrid,
No,
a single
we
underwear is
have
like almost $20.
Yeah.
and you go to like any other Walmart, any Target, and like all these underwears are on special for like $5 to like $20 and stuff.
Well, it
and
does
it's
take
like
more fabric to make it.
It does take more fabric
They
to make
use
it,
that
but
as an
it's,
excuse, but
that
you
would-
make yards of fabric
Yeah.
for gowns. You like
Is a
it- yeah,
small
it's-
a different price than an extra large or a
It,
large?
it is.
And
yeah,
we're willing-
for 3XL shirts, I got to pay more money.
I think people view models and Instagram people and all of us who are plus size and proud as we're pushing this obese lifestyle.
Yes.
No, I am pushing the fact that this is what I live in. This is my life. And I need other people who feel this way to say, hey, I want to be able to wear clothes that look cute too.
I do think there's a problem with obesity in America, but I think it's a first world country problem because it's spread across the globe. And also, I don't see it as a problem. I do feel like health-wise, people should try to be healthier, but there's no perfect body. There's no perfect person. There's no
And this is where I disagree with her. I think claiming that the obesity epidemic is not a problem and that it's just body diversity is an issue because obesity breeds illness. Often this is an oversimplification, but follow me along here. Obesity breeds illness. Illness impacts society's ability to function if it's done on a large scale. We saw this during COVID. If a lot of people are unable to participate in societal functions, things go away. They can come back when people are able to participate again. But if we have this massive amount of issue with chronic illness and illness bred from obesity, not only are the functions of society being hindered, but then there's an overarching strain on the medical facilities because you only have so many doctors, you only have so many nurses, and if we can reduce the frequency with which people have to go to the doctor, the frequency with which people have to go to the hospital, that is what creates a net good for the functioning of everyday society.
perfect size, and there's people who are underweight. There's a lot of them, and then there's a lot of people who are overweight. So I really don't see it as like a problem. But just to touch on what you were saying, because I am in the fashion industry, I wanted to become a fashion designer. My dad was one, and they buy 10 rolls of fabric for one price. So it really doesn't cost that much to make underwear.
Sure, but don't you also?
But the argument would be that for that same, let's just take a yard of fabric. Okay, let's just take a yard for an example. You may have hundreds of yards, but if you can get 20 pairs of underwear out of a single yard of fabric at a size small, but at a size 4X, you can only get 10, maybe even less. That is what makes the fabric cost more, is because it takes more of that fabric to create the garment that you are going to be selling individually.
Have to worry about distribution. I mean, if the average person is, let's say, in between small, medium, large, and you're sending clothes out for those, you know you could send out 10,000 of this, 10,000 of that, 10,000 of that. You can't always send out 10,000 3XLs because you're not going to have that many people fitting in the 3XL.
No, because there's somebody who works in marketing and they research that area. There's a census. So we have a database of what type of people are there. Now, we don't know who's going in there, but we know the type of people that live in that area and the type of the people that come and visit the area. So that person is.
But even the census doesn't necessarily take into account the weight. So that what she's saying here doesn't make sense to me.
Doing their job accordingly, and usually large sizes are sold out.
Okay, so somebody brought up the food desert earlier. I can't even think of an area that would have a so-called food desert.
Sorry, can someone explain, like maybe just for my ignorance, I'm
Like
guessing a
food
food desert is just there's no food anywhere?
No, it's healthy options for food. So you can go into certain low-income areas and you'll see a Starbucks.
I really like her. I do. I like her. I feel like, well, I don't agree with her 100%. on things. I think that she's very articulate and she makes good points. And I love that when someone is openly like, hey, I don't know about this, she's the first one to jump in and explain. I like her.
A McDonald's, a Chick-fil-A, but there's no Trader Joe's.
A food desert, actually properly, there isn't any, like for a long period of driving, there's
Distance.
one gas station and a liquor store. Then you have to drive 2 more miles to hit the next grocery store.
But with the food desert, it's not just that there can be a grocery store there, but if I'm making minimum wage, I'm not going to spend all of my money on what is going to last me 2 meals versus what's going to last me an entire week.
Yes.
Or if I'm on EBT and I have specific things that I have to choose to buy versus what I can't buy.
Yeah.
I'm born and raised in Colorado. In the outskirts, there's so many small towns that you don't even know that they're there. Most of them you won't see on a map, but if you're from there, then you'll know, and they all have to drive a decent amount to be able to go to an actual grocery store.
But how often are you going grocery shopping? Maybe like once every 2 weeks would be typically
I think it
normal. So you have to do a drive
My
once
family, I gotta go
every.
once a week.
So you're making a drive once a week, once every 2 weeks.
This is
Not a
all
lot of people
saying
have-
drive.
She strikes me as someone that doesn't understand. Like, she's like, "Oh, what? But you only have to go grocery shopping once a week, once every 2 weeks." Girly, honestly, like, I don't know fresh fruit that lasts 2 weeks or fresh fruit that even lasts a week. I go, my family, we all end up stopping by the grocery store at some point. So that's 3 people stopping by the grocery store uh, each week. We tend to buy our own fruits and vegetables because we know what we plan on eating and we don't want there to be an excess amount of waste. Yeah, like that. I feel like she doesn't. I feel like she lives in the city and doesn't understand this conversation at all. Like she's someone that I feel where this woman I feel is kind of trying to explain in depth more, and this is actually kind of surprisingly, but I feel like she's trying to explain a bit more in depth why she thinks the way she thinks, and she tends to be a bit more obstinate and more surface level discussion. But you only have to go uh grocery shopping once a week. Okay, but I'm curious for you, dear. Um how often have you been like, "Oh, I forgot that," and then on your way home you stop by the grocery store to grab it? Some people don't have that luxury. Like, this is something that I felt initially when I switched jobs, was that where I was there was a dense amount of stuff located around it. It was really easy to stop somewhere and get something to eat for lunch. There were 2 different grocery stores, easily, quickly accessible, that I could stop on my lunch break and grab something if I needed it for dinner. There was a point where I had an hour lunch, and so I was able to stop there, spend 20 minutes food shopping, throw it in my car, work the rest of my shift, and go home with a bunch of groceries. And where I am now, that is simply not possible. I have found a closer grocery store, one that I can hit on my way home. That doesn't require me to go out of my way, but it's still not something close enough to the school itself where on my lunch break I could run up there real quick. There is nothing around that school for me to be able to just pop in somewhere. And that's where I feel like she doesn't understand, because she's been surrounded by that convenience, that she doesn't understand the extra step and the extra mile that you have to go through to get to that grocery store for some people, depending on location. I feel like she's oversimplifying it, and she's not really thinking about it. Like, I feel like she in particular is very reactionary a little bit, but not in an explosive way, but just like she doesn't stop and think about things. She just wants to have a quick word back. That's what I feel from her.
Access to the
Yeah, like what
time
if I don't have a
to-
car?
I was like, I don't
Like, I don't even
and if
know.
you don't have, usually these food deserts also have very poor public transportation options.
Yeah,
So
like in the
you are
mountains.
left with people who are stranded.
Yeah, but then what are they eating at all?
Yeah.
Unhealthy crap.
Like,
No, but how
what-
are they
what-
surviving
what,
at
they're going through
all?
the drive-through? They don't got a car to go to the
Yeah,
drive-through. How are they-
exactly.
They usually, what I've seen when I go to those rural towns and those rural places, is they have chickens and they have animals,
Right.
and guess what? You can get some healthy food out of that. That's
That
like, you know,
sounds
having
healthy.
eggs and protein and things like that. I think I would be healthier if I lived rurally. In fact, my wife and I are trying to leave the state so we're not near all the Uber Eats and all that stuff.
I grew up in a town of
So I understand what he's saying, but I actually side with I side with the other people on this one, mostly because it's like you think that, well, but they have chickens and cows, and I would think that you would eat healthier. Those you realize that you can't just kill them and eat, right? Like there's a process that has to be done with the animal in order before you can eat it. And you're like, we think we'll be healthier because we won't have Uber Eats options. No, but you also don't have the option to just run to the grocery store either. You don't have as many healthy options readily available. And if it's late at night, you're like, oh shit, I need milk. There's not a grocery store, but a gas station down the street that has the um the milk, so you can go and grab the milk. But then you see, oh, they have this fried food, so maybe you get yourself a hot dog or a piece of pizza or some of the candy that's at the convenience store. Like, there is a trade-off here that, yes, you don't have the variety, so you don't have the level of temptation, but you also don't have the variety, meaning you don't have as many options. I actually am sympathetic to the food desert thing. And when they're like, "What? Well, how are they surviving at all? How are they surviving at all?" The public programs in those areas, because oftentimes, and I say this because I've worked in a poor Title I school, meaning that the um, majority of, like, there's a certain percentage of kids whose families fall below the poverty line, and they almost every school. I subbed at a couple of different Title I schools apart from the one that I worked at as well. And every Title I school has a pantry, like a community pantry sort of thing, and those kids are given packages of food to take home to their families. The thing is that these tend to be highly processed, shelf stable foods. So that's kind of where that food is coming from. If they don't have easy access to food, and if they are poor, then their options are typically what's given to them, which is primarily processed, shelf stable food and not fresh produce.
500, the obesity problem there was not as significant as, say, in LA. And we talk about like food deserts and stuff. The nearest Walmart where I grew up was 45 minutes in any direction. The nearest McDonald's was nowhere near to be seen for a long time. So when I hear these, like, and there could be some evidence there as like the obesity problem is very low lift.
Were there grocery stores in your small town?
Yes.
Exactly.
I'm like kind of baffled by the fact
Thank you.
Maybe I just need to go out there and like experience the food deserts, but like there was grocery stores where I grew up. Just because we lived in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean we didn't have access to food. And actually, and I have to agree, we did have access to healthy food. Very healthy food all the time. I don't think this is big of an issue in my personal opinion.
Fat shaming is worse than skinny shaming.
So I do agree that fat shaming is worse than skinny shaming. Just overall, entirely, the way that people like comment on people's weight compared to somebody skinny, they usually don't comment on somebody skinny.
Yeah.
They don't think there's something wrong with them. They don't, like, they'll maybe say like, oh, you're very thin. Do you want to eat a cheeseburger? But that's not as bad as telling somebody you eat 10, stop. And you don't even know that they're eating 10.
Fat shaming is a systemic problem. You're not gonna not get a job because you're too skinny. Skinny bodies are praised in our society, whereas fat bodies, like,
I'm sorry, this falls into negative comments are negative comments, and I'm sorry, but I don't subscribe to the whole fat shaming is a systemic issue. I don't subscribe to that type of thought. I think that it's kind of bullshit. That's my perspective on the whole fat shaming. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I 100% think that fat shaming happens. And I think that skinny shaming happens, but I don't think that one is inherently worse than the other. One might be more common than the other.
don't get it as often as
Or sorry, one may happen more often than the other, but that does not mean that one is worse than the other.
other people, but I get a lot of comments on my Instagram that are saying like, you're really beautiful, but you would look a lot better if you lost 50, 60 pounds.
Something that I always get a lot of comments on is my masculinity as a man because of how skinny I am. It's always something that I've always kind of dealt with. My favorite comment is always, I look like a sickly, ill Victorian child. And
That's horrible.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at that.
no, I don't. It doesn't bother me as much. But this idea that skinny people can't also get these kind of comments are just kind of mind blowing. That doesn't mean that they're, that one side is getting it worse than the other. I think that there are both sides getting piled on, just at different varying degrees.
I think we're conflating two things as well. So there's a difference between fat shaming and fat discrimination. Fat shaming is an aspect of fat discrimination, but some of the things you were touching on are specifically societal and systemic fat discrimination that goes into our medical system. It goes in.
Okay, so her name is Cambria. Cambria, I disagree with the fat discrimination, but I do enjoy that she's making the distinction, and that's why she came down on her position the way she did. Um, I'm curious though. I want to hear your guys' opinion because we talk a lot about fat shaming, and that tends to all get rolled up in one thing. What do you guys think about fat discrimination? I don't think that it's as big of an issue as it's made out to be by the fat acceptance community. I don't know if I subscribe to that it's a thing at all, really. But that one I don't have a hard opinion set on yet. Curious about your opinions though.
Into employment, it goes into all of our civil rights. As fat people, that skinny people don't necessarily have that same issue. And I come from cultures where they straight out called out skinny people. Oh, you look like bones, oh flaca, all of that. So I watched my cousins go through it. I went through it when I would get too skinny. As people, we are just too scrutinized when it comes to our bodies. We don't let people live.
But I think that's a good point. You said you were called skin and bones when you got
Not I, my cousin.
But your cousin. So people using shame as a motivator to get your cousin to not be too skinny. Shame as a motivator is a powerful tool. So the reason I sit over there is fat shaming worse than skinny shaming. Well, you could argue that shaming somebody in order to motivate them towards a healthy lifestyle is actually a good thing. Now, I have a lot of empathy because hearing your story about how you've been struggling with this since you were a child.
Since I was like a newborn baby, like health, just everything's just been on that end where I've never known anything about being skinny or being fit or being athletic. I've never known anything about that.
Probably your situation, I don't think shame necessarily would motivate you, but for somebody where it is a option, so for instance, if you watch TLC, you watch My 600-Pound Life.
I'm sorry, I disagree with Lauren. I don't think that shaming is a good motivator in most circumstances. They're not related to weight, but I think that shaming someone for how they treated someone else, I think is I'm sorry, but it does work with children. That when I see a child hit another, and this is when I was working at an elementary school, but yeah, I would make kind of a big deal. We don't hit. Could you do that? How could you hurt like the that kind of shit? I do think that is that it is a tool that can be used when it's done for something that's more long term. Like I think what it is that shame can work as an immediate correction for certain very specific behaviors. I don't really like shame as a motivator or as a corrector across the board. I do like shame used when it's used to essentially as a stand-in for empathy until they can develop that sense of empathy. Shame is like the intermediary between like just not caring and empathy. Shame is that intermediary until the kids can develop empathy. But as a general tool, and especially for like something like someone's overweight and stuff, I don't think that it's a motivator, and I don't think that it's helpful. If you shame yourself and that's how you motivate, that's you. That's something different to me. That doesn't work for me either, but that's something that you can do for sure. If that works for you. But the big difference is that you are doing that to yourself. Someone isn't doing that to you, you know?
Thousand Pound Sisters, Family by the Ton. All of them can do it. All of them have had this systemic issue
That's
of
the thing,
weight
though. I
gain.
have watched those like as a younger person, and it would make me feel disgusted with me when I was a kid. So it would make me worse, and it made my mental health worse. Because then I'm like, is that how like everybody automatically views me as just like somebody who's oversized and could possibly never even attain it because it's so just common?
I don't think we should shame anyone to do anything.
No.
I think everyone deserves to like themselves enough to like enjoy life. And if you do that as a
For once, I kind of agree with Madeline here. I don't think that we should necessarily be shaming people for how they are in this moment. I don't think that shame is helpful for most things. Like I said, with certain kids, before their brain has developed empathy, shame is kind of the stand-in option there. Other than that, I'm not, if the person has the capacity for empathy, shame has no, not much use at all.
fat person, okay. If you do it as a skinny person, also chill. It's not my business.
Shame is a broad category. I do think shame works in some cases. I think that there has been good fat shaming towards me and bad fat shaming. Bad fat shaming is just, somebody just saying, you're fat, things like that. That doesn't really work. But what does work is somebody looking at me and saying, don't you want to be around for your kids? And that worked.
I don't think
that
that's
worked.
shaming.
Yeah, like, do you
I think
consider
that's-
that shaming?
I do. I think that's shaming. I think they were telling me, like, you should lose weight to be around for your children. I think that's shaming. Like an attempt to, like, try and say something bad about me.
Like they're
to
personalizing
encourage me.
it towards you and towards your kids. Like,
Sure.
of course, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that worked. I think that worked. That really encouraged me to go to the gym and start trying to lose weight.
But that's you, though.
Sure. I think you have to be specific to the person.
I think that's one thing is it depends on the person.
Sure,
And if someone wants to shame me and it depends on the person. I've been shamed a couple times and it's kicked me into gear to try to gain weight, but it's still really hard.
Sure.
And it's, it depends on who you are, I think.
When you were making a comment about people questioning your masculinity, I get the question of actually looking like a woman all the time, and it's always in play. I always get compared to like male characters, especially when I don't wear makeup, and that's because I don't have boobs, and I can't help that, but it's definitely really, really hard to like have people tell you constantly, like, here's the standard of how a woman should look, and you don't look like that, without even saying it. They don't say it. They're categorizing me. They're making fun of me, saying that I look like this one soccer player or something. And, I think it's funny, but also shame can also be hard because I can see what you mean. Sometimes it can really motivate you when it's out of love,
Yes,
but when it's out
that's
of
the difference.
pain and when it's out of like not knowing someone
Yeah.
and just saying
Just
it, then
viciousness.
Yeah, the people who said that to me about my kids were not, just some random guy online. It was
Right.
people who were close to me and I knew cared about me, who I had a conversation with. So I do think it matters who says it, but I still would consider it to an extent shaming. And I'm okay with that. I think there is good shame. I think sometimes it helps motivate people in the right way.
The body positivity movement promotes childhood obesity.
This was a question I was not expecting, and I gotta be honest, I think there's I don't have a hard and fast. I think to say yes totally or no totally is not correct. There are a couple of fat acceptance creators that we've even looked at that talk about um how you should teach your child to intuitively eat and that sort of thing, and uh not classify good foods or bad foods and that sort of thing, and kind of like encourage parents to let kids eat what they think is right. There are a couple of those. The grand scheme of things, though, with the fat acceptance movement, that hasn't been my general experience. Um, it's but then there's teenagers that see them, but it doesn't really feel like it's geared towards. This is a tricky one for me. I think if we're gonna go childhood obesity, we're not. I know childhood obesity would technically rope in teenagers as well, but we're gonna talk childhood obesity as the younger children, and for that I would say not really, because the fat acceptance movement tends to gear more towards older teens and early to mid 20s. And for that reason, Like, it can influence how people parent, but so can any other movement. I don't think that it has that direct connection. I feel like it has to go through a process before it would reach the kids. And at that point, it becomes more the responsibility of the individual parent and how they're. I just. I tend to fall on a soft no on that one, but I'd be curious to know your opinions.
Diet culture has positive effects.
Okay, my issue with that one um is diet culture has positive effects. There's different perspectives of what we need to define diet culture in order to get there. Because to me, diet culture is like those fad diets and shit, in which case I wouldn't say if there are positive effects, they're very few and far between. But if we're talking about diet culture as in getting healthy and learning to eat better and cutting down on sugary snack stuff, then I would say it has very positive effects. So it kind of depends on what your definition of diet culture is.
I guess for me, diet culture is an important thing to
But the Fed acceptance one just blew by. Like that didn't have that it wasn't really discussed.
have for people in the world. What I've realized after we're about to finish this up is there wasn't a lot of talk on skinny culture or like skinny people as a whole. Maybe that's because of how the prompt is. But I think it's important if we're going to give positivity to kids who are obese, I think it's important to give them the options to, say if they want to lose weight, they can. And I don't see a problem with that in any real sense.
I think that diet culture is a reason that a lot of people struggle with weight problems in the first place. I have even struggled with my own weight issues in the past, and I was like struggling kind of with depriving myself too much because I had a trainer. And then I started binge eating. And as soon as I had like a mental break where I was like physically incapable of stopping myself from putting food in my mouth, I immediately went to see a doctor. And that doctor told me to read a book called Intuitive Eating. And it wildly changed my life. And it was about getting past diet culture and about how so many people ruin their lives with diet culture. And you see it with like somebody talked about eating grapes and lettuce, and it's grapes and lettuce, and it's just like it's this extreme, and so you go from one extreme and then you break, and then you go to the other extreme, and so like I was in my extreme, I broke, so that's why I'm anti-diet culture.
Yeah, I tried keto for a while, and that's the thing about what I really.
So I feel like with the perspective of diet culture, we're getting kind of a mix of them. She mentioned intuitive eating, which kind of surprised me. I gotta be honest, in general, unless you're recovering from an ED, which it sounds like she might have been, um, I mean, talk to your doctor, talk to your care team. Don't take advice from me. For like the average person, I would say intuitive eating is not the way to go. I certainly know that intuitive eating is not my way to go. Um, but that's me. And I just don't think intuitive eating, I don't think the food that we have available to us is conducive to intuitive eating. If you're only eating whole foods, if you're only eating minimally processed foods, then it might very well be very doable and very good for you. But with our hyper palatable foods and our food engineered so that you don't feel full the same way, or it interrupts that full sensation, that's where my issue comes in with the idea of intuitive eating.
Realizes like that fad diet kind of stuff. And yeah, did I lose weight? I absolutely lost weight. Sure, I didn't keep it off, and the reason I didn't keep it off is because diet culture is about turning the word diet from your overall eating into an activity that takes place over a period of time. A diet should not be something you do from January until May of next year. Diet is what you continually eat, is what you continually put into yourself.
I agree with him. That's kind of my issue with diet culture too, is it's like it's treated as this temporary thing instead of long-term lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
Lifestyle.
Yeah. So my issue with diet culture is this idea of like, oh, I've got this perfect solution for you, man. All you got to do is this, 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 and this, and that. And it's like, no. Like the reality is like, yeah, there are good, correct, and objective ways, I think, for a lot of people to eat. And yes, everybody has to have some variations here and there. There's no one bag fix all. And diet culture is so much about trying to say like, all you got to do is just eat cheese puffs every day for the rest of your life.
And it's easy.
Yeah. And so that's why I think diet culture doesn't help.
You know, you're always going to get those people who have the perfect answer. They have the perfect solution to either lose weight, or diet isn't just losing weight. It's also gaining weight, you know. And I think a lot of people, maybe it's just for me, but when I diet, it's actually not the opposite of fasting. I'm trying to eat more. I'm trying to gain more.
Yeah.
And I think people forget that when it comes to diet. When people instantly hear the word diet, they think losing weight. And I don't think that should always be the case.
I've been on a lot of diets. I've been on diets for myself. I've been put on diets, and I've been put on diets by my coaches. So when I was young, I felt like it was more so like fasting, not eating, but working out. And maybe hopefully eating once you get home as a reward. And then when it became like, oh, like you're a good person in the team to like be the big person, be the defender, be buff. So it was like, now we have to gain all this weight and we have to pound you out. So it was like, I had to eat like 5 meals in a day. And I felt so gross because I was just like, I've never had to like pull out like a bar or something and like eat it during class and be like, I have to eat this because it's part of my diet.
When we talk about diet culture, we're talking about not your diet as a whole. It's usually a fad diet is what we're talking about when we're talking about diet culture. And for me personally, I know that I've seen a
And that's interesting that she says that, because a lot of fat acceptance people will put any sort of restriction that you're trying to do, and not just a fad diet, but any restriction you're trying to do, as a form of diet culture. And I find it interesting that she kind of equates diet culture with fad diets, which is kind of what I do too. That's how I equate diet culture. And for that, I would say no, it doesn't have positive effects. And it's just interesting. It's interesting to see this variety of takes on these different subjects within like fat acceptance rhetoric.
lot of, especially women in my life, going on fad diets that are just not sustainable. And that's kind of the purpose of diet culture, is that it's not a sustainable thing.
But we're all talking about like mainstream, like keto, like gluten-free. And I think everyone's just polarized on these certain ones that I believe that you should eat gluten. I think if you take it out of your diet, you're actually going to get sick.
Unless you
Unless,
are.
celiacs, celiacs, no. Like, yeah.
It goes back to like what she said, which is, intuitive eating.
So what is the positive you think you've seen for people from diet culture? Which I think, and I guess, what do you consider diet culture?
I guess like diet culture to me is the resources you need to get to where you want to be in your life, in your body. That's how I've always viewed diet
By
culture.
dieting, do you mean like journaling what you're eating?
Yeah, if you want to journal, if you want to, talk to a therapist, if you want to work out, if you want to see a doctor, if you want to go on meds, like everyone's
But
always...
it's not being super, like when you diet, you're not being like, I'm completely cutting out carbs or I'm completely doing this, right?
Drinking lemon water only.
You're like
restrictive
watching your
behaviors.
macros and your micros and you're calculating
Like,
that
I
and
guess
you're staying
if
within.
you're asking if I know how many calories I have to eat, yeah, like I have to eat like 4,000 a day.
When most people talk about diet culture, they've done some sort of extremely restrictive thing, and when you do something really restrictive, it changes your brain chemistry and the way that you think about food, and it makes you obsessive over food, and then but it sounds like the way that you're doing it is extremely healthy because you're not depriving your body of something.
But isn't that just goes back to like you guys are talking about the extremes of diet culture?
Diet culture is one thing, and then a healthy lifestyle
Having a
and
healthy
intuitive
diet
eating
is
type thing
different.
are two different things.
All right.
I personally don't think of living a healthy lifestyle as a diet.
You've been in like model spheres. Do you see diet culture and how has it impacted the space?
There was a point in my life, like when I was a junior in high school, where the person that I was with at the time, he's like 6'6" and super tall. And so, the mom was like, hey, like,
Not to cut off Izzy or anything, but I mean, we only have 2 minutes left, but I kind of don't feel like there's anything more to really gain from this conversation. Um, I think, I think we're done. Uh, so overall, I was kind of surprised. I had more agreements with this than I thought I would. Um, like more agreements with like both sides than I thought I would. but it was interesting, and I'd be very interested to hear your opinions on the different questions that we covered today, and your opinions on some of our contestants on this show. Is contestants the right word? What participators? You know what I mean. I'd be interested to hear your opinions on not only the questions asked, but some of the people that were involved. Now, I would like to talk about manhwa. New episode of Remarried Empress dropped. I am only reading the free ones. I don't have access to the 4 new ones, but I am loving the shit that is going down. I am absolutely loving it. And also, so I haven't started reading The Reason for the Twin Ladies Disguise. That's just kind of on my to read list. But One Husband is Enough is getting very good. I love her relationship with the Holy Knight. It's wonderful. Behind Her Highness's smile is really interesting. We're seeing that she's more there than we thought she is, but she's also kind of broken in her own way because like she isn't really allowed to be a person and she hasn't been allowed to be a person for years, so she ends up kind of standing in the mirror and reciting things that were said to her to, I think, to kind of keep her sane or keep her abilities to be a functioning human up. It's really interesting. And also, there's a Duolingo webcomic, just so you know. That's a thing. When it comes to manhwa on Tappy Tunes, The Dying Villainess's Path to a Happy Ending is still going strong. It's pretty good. I started reading some more because there was a couple of free chapters on All for My Dearest Juliet. And that one is looking interesting. It's this girl that's been sick her entire life, and then she encounters this guy at when people from a different country come over, and for like because her family's like ruling over their region of the world. I'm not sure if she's called a princess, but I'm not sure if her father's a king or an emperor. Anyway, people from the another country come over. One guy kind of acts like he's a servant, and they get to talking, and she doesn't know that he's actually an archduke. And then just without anything said to her, she's basically being set up to marry him, but she isn't allowed to meet with him or talk with him, and he isn't. His brother who set this whole thing up seems to be sus, like really suspicious. But that's about as far as we've gotten, and I haven't really been able to. I can't buy anymore right now, so I'm just that one's just kind of left for now, which is a little frustrating, but it is what it is. Everything else is just kind of going on as it can be. There isn't a huge amount to say about these other um series right now. Like nothing big is really happening in any of the stories, really. And in all honesty, I've been spending a lot more time reading manga because I can read so much more in one sitting. So I'm a little less invested in these stories right now. Doesn't mean I'm not invested in them at all. I'm still reading them, I'm still enjoying them, but there isn't the same level of like shit happening with these as there is with manga because I can read so much of manga in one go. But I didn't want to keep this on too long. I want to keep this part really short because we are at over an hour and I still have to edit this. So I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.